Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftman Fred McInerney. Today we remember and commemorate the 104th anniversary of the Battle of Fromelles in July 1916 and the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Cape Sparta, which took place in July 1940. 104 years ago today, Major Geoffrey Gordon McRae of Hawthorn, Victoria, wrote his last letter home before leading the 60th Battalion in the assault at Fromelles. Today, I lead my battalion in an assault on the German lines, and I pray God that I may come through all right and bring honour to our name. If not, I will at least have laid down my life for you and my country, which is the greatest privilege one could ask for. Farewell, dear people, the hour approaches. Hours later, McRae was dead, one of 5,533 Australian dead, wounded and missing. He was 26 years old. The British suffered 1,547 casualties and the Germans 1,653. It was the darkest day in Australia's military history. Private Walter Jimmy Downing of the 57th Battalion described the 15th Brigade's carnage. Hundreds were mowed down in the flicker of an eyelid, like great rows of teeth knocked from a comb. Men were cut in two by streams of bullets, swishing in a flat lattice of death. Australians of the 8th and 14th Brigades captured enemy positions and penetrated deep into German defences. But without flanking support under fierce German counterattacks, they were forced to withdraw under brutal fire early in the morning. By dawn on the 20th of July, Australian trenches were teeming with wounded and dying. Realising the significance of the Fromelles to our young nation, Charles Bean returned to walk over the ground on the day of the armistice in 1918 to think, reflect and record before the battlefield returned to peace. We found the old no man's land simply full of our dead. The skulls and bones and torn uniforms were lying about everywhere. He described Fromelles as one of the bravest and most hopeless assaults ever undertaken by the AIF. On this site today at VC Corner is the only Australian cemetery without headstones and epitaphs. A stone wall sits in the middle of the former no man's land, inscribed with the names of 1,299 Australians with no known grave. Two mass graves nearby contain the remains of 410 unidentified Australians, casualties of muddled planning and reckless decision-making. This day, the 19th of July, was also an important one in the history of the Royal Australian Navy. 80 years ago, HMAS Sydney achieved a famous victory in the Mediterranean off Cape Sparta, off the northwest tip of Crete. On the 18th of July, HMAS Sydney, commanded by Captain John Collins, sailed from Alexandria with orders to support Royal Navy destroyers carrying out an anti-submarine sweep along the north coast of Crete. As the destroyers set about their task, Collins positioned Sydney some 60 kilometres north to cover them. What they didn't know was that two Italian cruisers were approaching from the southwest. At 7:20 on the morning of the 19th of July, one of the British destroyers spotted them. Outgunned, the destroyers made full steam for the protection of the Sydney, with the Italians in hot pursuit. Alerted to the situation, Sydney immediately steamed south. It was largely due to Collins' diligence that Sydney had kept station close enough to support the destroyers. To achieve surprise, he maintained strict radio silence as he closed with the enemy, although those on the fleeing destroyers may have thought that boded ill. At 8:20 a.m, Sydney caught sight of the Italian cruisers. 8 minutes later, opened up at long range, about 18 kilometres. The Italians were taken completely by surprise, and Sydney quickly scored hits on both enemy ships. Attempting to retreat under the cover of smoke, the Bartolomeo Colleone was seen to be on fire and soon came to a complete stop. The stricken ship was then finished off and sunk by torpedoes from the British destroyers at about 10 a.m. 121 of the crew had been killed, but 445 survivors were rescued by the British destroyers. Sydney had sustained just one hit to her forward funnel, which caused only minor damage and no serious casualties. News of the Sydney's victory dominated Australian newspapers, and on her return home in February 1941, she was greeted with great acclaim and warm welcomes. Commander of the Mediterranean Fleet, Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, was overjoyed with Sydney's victory and felt it had been a real morale booster when the news reached Australia. Today, we pay our respects to the Australian men and women who are commemorated here on the Roll of Honour, and to the survivors who returned home. We will recall the story of just one day, Private Michael Thomas Coogan, who was killed on the 19th of July 1916 at the Battle of Fromelles. We are honoured to acknowledge Mr. John King, President, Returned and Services League, Australia, ACT branch. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the hearts of the land they loved. And here, we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament flowers of the forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Michael Thomas Coogan. Michael Thomas Coogan was born in March 1889 in Corio, Victoria, the eldest of 7 children born to Michael and Mary Coogan. Known as Tom to his family and friends, Coogan lived in Lara to the north of Geelong, where he worked as a farm labourer. He enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 17th of July 1915 and started training at a local training depot. In November 1915, he sailed from Melbourne, bound for Egypt, as part of the 7th Reinforcements of the 21st Infantry Battalion. He did not take part in the Gallipoli campaign and was instead in Egypt for a period known as the doubling of the AIF, during which Australian units were expanded and reorganised in preparation for service on the Western Front and in Palestine. During this period, Coogan transferred to the 60th Battalion before joining the newly formed 58th Battalion on the 15th of March 1916. This unit formed part of the 15th Brigade of the 5th Australian Division. In June 1916, Coogan and the 58th Battalion sailed from Alexandria in Egypt to Marseille in France, and within days of arrival were behind the front lines at Steenbeck, near the French-Belgian border. Coogan and the 58th Battalion spent the next fortnight training behind the lines and manning frontline trenches, helping to improve drains and defences, and sometimes coming under enemy artillery fire. On the 19th of July 1916, the 58th Battalion took part in the Battle of Fromelles, Australia's first major infantry battle on the Western Front. Australian and British troops took part in a joint assault on an area of trenches surrounding a bulge in the German lines known as the Sugarloaf. The battle was preceded by a 7-hour-long artillery bombardment of the German lines. Though successful in some part of the lines, the bombardment failed to damage the German defences in front of the 15th Brigade's line of attack. Soon after the bombardment ended, German defenders were able to man their guns in anticipation of the Australian attack. Those who did attack came under extremely heavy machine gun and rifle fire. The Australian 5th Division suffered over 5,500 casualties in this single battle. Coogan was initially reported missing in action after the battle. It was not until September 1917, over a year later, that his family received news that he had been officially declared killed in action. The exact circumstances of his death are unknown, but he was likely killed by German machine gun fire when elements of his unit were ordered to take part in an advance late in the main attack. He was 27 years old and had been in France for less than a month. With no known grave, his name is commemorated at the VC Corner Australian Cemetery near Fromell. Private Michael Thomas Coogan's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Michael Thomas Coogan, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many men lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.